Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Marina Shea. I'll be your MC for the evening, and the four Master Food Preserver volunteers who have organized this program also include Helen Yee. Helen, if you can wave, Helen will be our chat monitor and will be presenting at our December Part 2 Persimmons program. Nina Hoyman, Nina give a wave, who will be talking to us about freezing, and Deirdre Davis, who will be talking about hoshigaki. So we'll have a little bit of a mix of some PowerPoint and some live presentations, but let's get into the program. Here we go. So preserve today, relish tomorrow. Here we go. As I said, we've got a chat monitor, so if you have questions at any point during the program, you can just type them right in there, and Helen will make sure that they get asked, or you can raise your hand and speak up. We'll also have a pause after each section for questions. Just a little bit of Zoom, make sure you keep your mics muted when you're not speaking. If you're having trouble with bandwidth, it usually helps to use speaker view and to turn your video off. Finally, we are recording this program, and at the end of the Zoom, there will be a post-program survey, and when you submit that, there'll be an instruction handout, and this slide deck will be sent to you. So who are we? The UC Master Food Preserver online program is a community outreach, online-based, grant-funded, volunteer program of the University of California Cooperative Extension that provides up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. I'm not going to read you the gobbledygook of the legalese on the disclaimers, but know that we are all, as Master Food Preservers, volunteers. We get no compensation from any source. We are trained and certified by the UC Master Food Preserver program, but what we say here does not represent and cannot be attributed to the University of California, and there are no endorsements or oppositions to any specific organization or product or service. So you might occasionally see us use a photograph or something, and that might be our personal product, but we are not making any endorsements. We're just talking about methods. Our mission is to keep Californians, because this was originally a UC program, but it really is all people, and we're reaching online anywhere the internet reaches, safe and well as they use culturally appropriate, research-based practices to safely preserve food in the home, reducing food waste, increasing food security, and providing ways for all of us to explore healthy food. So our goal today is to make you recipe ready for safely, first distinguishing types of persimmons and ripeness. I'll talk about that a bit. And then Nina Hoyman will talk about freezing persimmons. I'll come back and talk more about dehydrating persimmons into leathers, fruit leathers, and slices. And then Deirdre Davis will wind up with the whole thing that is the whole hoshigaki drying process. Now, we will have a Persimmon 2 program on December 5th at this same time, and we'll cover their canning persimmon jams, spiced refrigerator pickles, flavored vinegar, and we'll have some updates on Deirdre's hoshigaki process. And so the two programs are separate. This is recorded if someone wants to catch up and also join on December 5th. All right, let's talk about some types of persimmons. There are two major types, and for those of you who answered 1 to 10 for types, commercially available, you're probably not going to see more than 10. The big ones that you'll often see in the grocery store at this time of year are the sweet varieties, that is non-astringent, and the typical one you'll see available is the fuyu, so that's on the left column. And it's very distinctive because it has that flat little bottom. It almost looks like an orange tomato. And those are ready to go. The second type, major type of persimmon, and there are multiple species within all of these. There really are over 1,000 species in the world, and they're different types that are native to different countries. But here in the US, you'll see a lot of the hachia that is in the middle, here, and that is one of the major available types of the astringent category variety of persimmons. And when I say astringent, I mean that it's got a lot of soluble tannins. So if you eat it when it's unripe, you'll get that kind of puckery, almost like someone sprayed your mouth with sandpaper kind of feeling. And so you do have to ripen those specially. And then just for fun, I did want to acknowledge, and particularly in Japan, you'll find, and in other countries that are very much into persimmons, there are pollination variants in really a third category. And those are persimmons that have to be pollinated and get their seeds in order to then become sweet. And then they become edible right away when they're hard, just like a fuyu would. And I wanted you to see the pictures of these on the far right. That's a maru, meaning round, that little round, kind of pale orange fruit in the middle there. And then that's a huakume on the bottom. But there are lots and lots of these variations, and they're often called things like brown sugar or cinnamon persimmons or chocolate persimmons because they have that characteristic brown speckled flesh. And the brown speckling is good. That is not a rotten piece of fruit. That the more brown speckling, the better. The more seeds, really, the better, because it's likely that you'll get more sweetness. And so that's a variety you might see at like some farmers markets and so on. And you can basically treat them as you would a fuyu persimmon. So just to summarize a little bit here, we have in the non-astringent category, fuyus, often giros are available commercially. Again, those can be eaten right when you buy them. They can be firm. It's like an apple. You can slice them up. You can put them in salads. It's fine to go peeled or unpeeled, raw fruit. You can puree that firm fruit, or you can wait and ripen them to soft, gooey softness, and that's still a luscious fruit. They're often used in salads. You can use them for pickling, for canning, making jams, and baking. You can dry the fruit. We'll talk about some of those options. The other major category, again, the one to pay attention to, is the astringent category. Hachiya is the most common example you'll see, but there's gyambos, there's tananashis, there are a lot of different astringent persimmons out there, and people may have different trees in their yards as well. Now, what's important for the astringent is that you must ripen them. Typically, that is just letting them go until they are soft, almost gooey, mushy. And they'll be ripened then and not astringent when they get to that stage. There are some interesting gymnastics you could do with chemistry to treat them to reduce the soluble tannins, that tannic astringency, even keeping them firm. And we can talk about that if people want to go down that rabbit hole. But generally speaking, what you want to do with an astringent persimmon is just put it in a dish and leave it on your counter at room temperature and be very patient. It might take days. It probably will take weeks, and it will get very, very soft. So you can see in the picture below that orange and red persimmon actually came off of the same tree. The orange one is quite firm and hard. That the one that's much more reddish, they don't always change color, but they will get a very different kind of translucent look to the skin when they get very gel-like inside, and that's when it's really, really ripe. It's almost gooey, like pudding inside. So because of that texture, they're often used in desserts, often frozen. You can use them in jams, in baking, to flavor vinegars. Again, we can dry fruit. And I did want to make a comment about the difference between ripeness and maturity, because you can pick any fruit, and sometimes if you just pick it too early, it's never really going to ripen into a perfect fruit because it was just off the tree early. And these are two pictures of fuyus that were taken at a farmer's market in Southern California on October 12th. And then about 3 weeks later, so on November 2nd. And you can see that they were picking that early fruit when it was still quite green on the shoulders. And it'll ripen up and sort of color up some when you leave it, but it will probably never have the same quality as a fruit that is picked really when it's nice and mature. So when you're buying, you're going to really be looking for that nice orange color, sort of minimize the green and yellow kind of shoulders, just the same way that you would look at a peach, for example, if you were going to buy it. You want to get it as close as you can to the maturity. And same farmers market, same, a little bit of a closer spread in dates, but these are now hachias. You can see they have that characteristic pointy tip, the acorn kind of shape. And again, a lot greener choices available than later on. The three on the right were actually all picked on the very same day from the same tree, but again, sunshine, different exposure, you'll sometimes get differences. But those will color up fairly nicely just sitting on the counter. All right. Get my slide to advance. With that, with our over 1,000 varieties of persimmons, but that come in a very narrow window of a month or two in the fall, let's start learning about some ways that we can preserve this bounty so that we can enjoy it all year. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina Hoyman for freezing.
Hello. Let me know if you can't hear me. So Marina has showed us the differences between the Fuyu persimmons and the Hachia persimmons and how to tell when they're ripe. What I'm going to talk about is how to freeze whole Fuyu persimmons and what you could do with them, and also focus on freezing pureed Hachia persimmons so that you can use them in the future. So on this slide the point is that freezing is ideal at home at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or less. So my freezer there on the left shows that it was at -5. And just to be certain, I could put a small thermometer in my freezer and it shows it in that location where I had a persimmon, it was at 0. So we're good. Freezing doesn't actually destroy bacteria or molds or yeasts. What it does do is it reduces and slows their growth or their multiplication. So that's why we need to start with produce that's at the peak of ripeness or freshness. And then we want to wash it well before we freeze it. And so the next slide, we'll cover a few quick sanitation points. Next slide, please. So we're obviously going to start with clean countertops and utensils, wash our hands with soap and warm water. All produce should be washed before it is consumed or preserved. And you wash persimmons and fruits by gently rubbing any dirt and so forth off under cold running water. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the whole persimmons and then I'll talk about the persimmon puree. Persimmon puree, though, just to show you a slide, there's a lovely example of a persimmon cake from a restaurant on one side there. And then there's an example of, mom's persimmon steamed pudding on the right. So we're going to turn off the slides now, and I'm going to show you a couple of things about whole persimmons and then about puree. These persimmons were in my freezer. This one is a Fuyu. It happens to be a large Fuyu. This was a Hachia. This is actually from that batch that was bought at the farmer's market on October the 12th. But let's talk about what you could do with just as an easily frozen Fuyu persimmon. You can make a nice frozen dessert out of it by cutting the top off and eating it with a spoon. So probably need to let it thaw out just slightly longer than I did. And this would be thawed and it could be served as a little dessert. So thanks to some of our internet websites that have shown this kind of a project. Now, one interesting thing about Hachia persimmons is that by freezing them, you actually reduce the astringency. Not as much as if you let them get ripe and put the puree in the freezer, but if I compare this Hachia persimmon which I put in the freezer about 10 to 14 days ago, with the same one that I bought at the same time but left out on the counter, or even put in a paper bag with an apple and banana. And if I cut the frozen one open and taste it, it will be less astringent than the one that sat out on the counter. So I believe that the freezing process breaks down some of the cells and allows the ingredients, the tannins, to combine in a way that that reduces the astringency of these Hachiya persimmons. So that is something you could do with a Hachiya persimmon if you wanted to try it. But for the best quality, what we want to do is have ripe persimmons, like these ones, for example, which are very, very soft now. And we want to puree them and put that puree in the freezer. And the reason for doing this is so that we'll have the persimmon puree when we want it. Let's say we want to make a special holiday dessert. It's very difficult to time your persimmon ripening, but if you let them ripen and then you freeze the puree, you can pull it out and bake with it very easily. So in order to make our puree, we need a couple of things. We need either a sieve to push the puree through there, a food mill, a blender, a food processor, something like that. We're also going to want to add a little bit of ascorbic acid. That'll preserve the color. And then we'll need some containers that are freezer safe. We could use plastic freezer safe things, silicone freezer safe things, or some canning jars are labeled freezer safe when you buy them. We're looking for the wide mouth ones. Those are the ones that are freezer safe, but it'll say on the package when you buy them. So, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is peel our persimmon, because the Hachiya persimmons peel is not recommended to be eaten. Now, some persimmons have seeds. There's a couple of examples of seeds right here. The persimmon that I'm peeling doesn't have any, but if you find these kind of seeds, obviously you're not going to want to, use a blender or a food processor, unless you've removed those. So this is, the old-fashioned way to do it. By pushing the puree through a sieve. And it actually works pretty well. But if you had a lot, you might do it a different way. This is how you get the finest puree here. And then based on the quantity, I've put this into a quart-sized bowl because the basic amount of ascorbic acid to add would be, if I had a quart amount of puree, then I would use a 1/8 teaspoon, and I would put in a 1/8 teaspoon amount of ascorbic acid, and that will help preserve the color. And then I'm going to put it in my freezer safe container. I would need several persimmons in order to get the amount that I need. Sugar could be added if you wanted. I wouldn't tend to add any sugar to this. If you're using a plastic bag, you're going to need to get the air out of it before you seal it up. You can use a a measuring tool to allow a 1/2 inch of headspace at the top of your container so that it will allow for some expansion. And then, of course, you want to label your puree with your container with persimmon puree, the amount you've put in there, and the date. And if you did add sugar or any additional ingredients, you'd put that in there. But sugar is the only additional ingredient we've been discussing here. So, you know, this is a little bag of persimmon puree that I pureed a couple days ago, and I would leave it in the refrigerator. I would leave it in the freezer for several months. One source says you could leave it up to 6 months. And then when you take it out, you'd thaw it in the refrigerator. I just removed it from the freezer a few minutes ago. And that's because frozen foods do spoil quicker. They the freezing process breaks the cell walls, the ice crystals, breaks the cell walls. And that allows food to go bad more quickly after it's been frozen. So I would use it promptly. It'd be ideal for baking. But another thing that you can do is mix it into whipping cream, or for a wonderful topping for your persimmon pudding or cakes. You could stir it into yogurt after you've thawed it in the refrigerator, and enjoy it when persimmons are not on the tree. So with any food preservation thing, if you have any questions about it, you could ask the master food preservers, and we'll be sharing that information on how you can get individual questions answered. But the overall rule of thumb is, when in doubt, throw it out. So are there any questions about freezing before we go on to discuss drying?
Nina, there was one question raised in the chat about why we do not eat hachia peels.
Yeah, hachia peels must have a type of fiber in them that combines with that the tannins that are inside the fruit, and that's what can cause digestive problems. People do not seem to have a problem eating the fuyu peels. Those really can be treated a lot like an apple. In fact, I've got some fuyu sitting in my refrigerator right now. But the skins and the peels of the hachias are just not recommended. And I think it relates to how they interact with the tannins to cause kind of a, it can cause some digestive problems.
This is Marina. I just want to add that the tannins are in the astringent variety of persimmons, both in the flesh and in the peel. I wouldn't be surprised if it's slightly more in the peel. I mean, if when you eat them, but the peels can safely be eaten if the fruit is ripe. It's more a matter of personal taste, but eat it if the peels were probably at a stage where it would create a buildup of too many tannins because the fruit isn't ripe enough, then the flesh would probably also present similar problems. But
the peels have the fiber, so
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like some people have been eating hachia peels. I have not read that that's recommended.
Yeah, I'm one of the crazy people who dries my peels after I make my hoshigaki and eat them as snacks.
Well, then there's probably tannins left in there. Okay, any more questions? And we do welcome your feedback. This is a new program to be putting these online, so we welcome your feedback later on.
Okay. Well, we'll have more time, I hope, for Q&A as you continue to think of ideas and questions. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, and we'll talk about another way we can use some of that nice frozen puree, which is, in making dehydrated leathers or, well, not fruit slices once you've pureed it. But let's pause for a moment and just talk about this whole preservation method of dehydration or drying the fruit. And why do you do it? Drying does destroy some microorganisms, but unlike some of the common thought many decades ago, it does not actually kill all of the pathogens that might be in fruits or vegetables. It'll help a little bit, but the main mechanism that it uses to make your food safe in the long run is that it will reduce the amount of water that's available in the fruit. And that water availability is necessary for the various pathogens and spoilage organisms like molds, for example, to grow. And so by essentially, depriving them of the water that they need to multiply, then you've controlled the spoilage. Another advantage of drying is that it reduces the volume considerably of your fruit that you're storing, and dried fruits and leathers can be stored at room temperature. And so that can save on space and energy costs. All right, so let's talk about persimmon leathers. You want to use ripe or slightly overripe fruit. In fact, if you've got one of those chias that's gone way over the hill into a puddle, a leather is a pretty good thing to do with it if you don't want to freeze it. You want to wash it, and with a hachia that's ripening on your counter, you want to wash it before it gets to the mushy stage because it's a lot easier. Remove that calyx, the little leafy stem part. You can peel it, and that is optional. Again, depending on whether or not you want that extra fiber in the fruit, and any seeds if there are seeds. And then you want to puree your fruit till it's smooth. You can use a blender or a food processor. You can put it through a food mill. You can use a hand wand. You do want to do, again, as with the freezing, add some acid. The recommended ratio is 1/8 of a teaspoon of ascorbic acid, or 2 teaspoons of lemon juice for each 2 cups of puree. And that does 2 things. Mostly what it does is it helps preserve the color. It keeps it from darkening as much as it would. Think about it, like an apple, they get brown, and the ascorbic acid helps. The other thing is it does seem to help with, combined with the drying heat, the process of destroying some of the harmful bacteria, but not all of it. So your basic tools that you need, there's some hachias, there's some fuyus. I like to literally just dump them straight into a measuring cup of one of the tall kinds and use the hand wand to mix it all up and add my ascorbic acid there. And then you'll need some kind of a dryer tray. Because I have a square dehydrator, I can use these silicone mats that you can find, but that you also, if you have one of the circular cylindrical drying units, you can use their special sort of fruit leather platforms. There are some ways to be able to dry in the oven. There are some drawbacks to that. In general, a dehydrator works better. Sun drying is also possible, but tougher as you get into these winter months, and certainly not in a humid area. But again, there's some possibilities. So what else do you do once you've made your purees? You can optionally add in all sorts of things. If you want more sweetness, and one of the nice things, frankly, about making your own leathers at home is that you can control the sugar content and the sweetness. You can add corn syrup or honey. Sugar, but granulated sugar, if you're storing over time, will tend to crystallize, and so it can ruin the texture of your leather or be a drawback. So you might want to stick with the other liquid sweeteners if you want to add them. You can add other fruit purees like applesauce. I really like, and I think applesauce by itself, if made into a leather, can be kind of bland, but the combinations of different fruits are fun. And adding spices is something that you can do. And the whole, sort of pumpkin pie spice array works really well with persimmon. So I've made them with cinnamon, with powdered ginger, with nutmeg, allspice, etc. You don't have to. Start very cautiously, depending on how strong your spices are. About 1/8 of a teaspoon for 2 cups to the start, and see what how that suits you. And then you just spread your puree onto your baking trays. You can take these silicone mats, you can take it all the way to the edge, but if you were using a baking pan lined, for example, with plastic wrap, then you would probably not want to go all the way to the edge. And there's an option here, if you want, to sprinkle all sorts of crazy add-ins. So for example, here on the lower left, you have coconut flakes that I've added, sunflower seeds. You can do, pepitas. You can put granola in. There's an enthusiastic master food preserver that I met who puts baby mini marshmallows in all of her fruit leathers. But it can be done, and the fruit will take it. Now, here's a little tip. You don't want to spread your layers too thick. Never over 1/8 of an inch for a layer, because you get what you see here, which is a bunching. It's hard to get it even anyway. And when you have too much puree, what will happen is that there's a tendency for the outer layer that's exposed to the dehydrator's blowing air to form a skin. And then what that can do is become a barrier to keep the rest of the moist parts of the puree spread wet. And that's not what we want. We want even drying all the way through. So this was obviously Marina got in a hurry and was impatient. And so what I did then is I squished out those wet parts. Fortunately, it wasn't totally encrusted, and you can literally see it makes a quite unattractive thing here, but that's okay, because there are going to be a couple more layers of puree that you're going to wind up putting on. I think the goal is, like always, probably at least 3 layers or so. Think of it like painting a house. You're going to do much, much better with several even thin coats than you will trying to just glop it all on. It's not likely to work as well. Now you're going to dehydrate, and if you have a dehydrator, the range is quite large for what is possible. Most of the books will tell you 140 is kind of the standard temperature that you would want. You might want to follow the drying guide on your own unit because many of them have guidelines. You can take it down as low as about 90 degrees or so, which would be the temperature, the minimum temperature would really want for sun drying, for example. I think, and you can see my dehydrator recommends 135 degrees Fahrenheit. I actually tend to start most fruit leathers around 115 or so, because I find that the higher temperatures do 2 things. First, they risk kind of creating that skin too quickly if I haven't been careful about the way I've spread the puree. And secondly, they do tend to darken the fruit much more quickly. And this is not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich here on the right. It's actually one layer that I dried at about 140, and then I flipped it over and put on a new layer and dried it at a much lower temperature. And it literally came out, sort of with 2 different colors. It is useful to rotate your trays and to flip the leathers to get more even drying. And you want each surface to not be tacky before you put on the next layer or call it done. And then you just cool it down and cut it however you want. I just make these little bars, but you can do the little roll-ups that, and wrap those up. You can put them in just plastic wrap if you're going to eat them right away, or put them in a lunch, or store them in an airtight container, a glass jar, plastic with a container with a lid. Leathers will keep at room temperature, although they will last longer, as all dried fruit will if you have it in the refrigerator or put it in the freezer. And these are just some of the different flavors here, the sunflower seeds and sandwich coconut and so on. All right. Very closely related to leathers are slices. Is there a question?
Yeah, Marina, before we go on,
Yeah.
Karen raised a very good point. She says that when she makes leathers, she makes it a little bit thicker on the edges in order to reduce the problem of the edges drying faster than the middle.
That's a great idea. Yeah, and spread, and that is almost always true. And so again, also if you can have a good mat that you're drying on that helps release the leather easily, than taking it all the way to the edge. As you know, you can build it up more easily. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Okay, let's go on to persimmon slices, quite closely related to it. And here you've got an example of some paper thin, crispy hachia persimmons and some, thicker, more traditional slices. Again, you want to use ripe fruit. Now, obviously, a very ripe hachia isn't going to slice; it's just going to puddle on you. But if you can take it right to the edge, then it's partially ripened, and the drying process can take it far enough that it'll reduce the tannins. Again, wash, remove the calyx. Peeling, again, I think is optional, although when you get into the rounds, I do tend to peel these because I find that the skins will dry a little bit differentially from the flesh, and so it kind of can make your pieces wrinkle up, and so it's just almost an aesthetic decision. Slice the fruits into the most uniform rounds that you can get, and so for that tends to be horizontally. I suggest not going over a 1/4 inch thick. You can go thicker, but it's a more labor to get the drying process really fully even and fully dried. And the tip is, if you do wind up with fruit that has seeds in it, you can pull them out when you're cutting, but sometimes that's kind of a pain. If you've got a sharp enough knife and they cut well, you can just throw them right on the tray, and they're very easy to remove the seeds after you dry. But whichever way, as long as you're not, serving them up with those hidden seeds. It is strongly recommended that you soak your cut fruit in an acid solution for several minutes, and that again helps preserve the color. It also can help with the process of the heat, killing more of the pathogens. And the ratio here for the soaking process, is a teaspoon of powdered ascorbic acid per 2 cups of water. If you have a lot of fruit, then you can put like 2 rounds through that same solution. And then if you're going to go longer, you need to start adding some more ascorbic acid, or let's make a fresh batch of soaking liquid. And optional, before you dry it, you may want to sprinkle on spices. Again, sort of the pumpkin pie series, ginger, allspice. My husband and I discovered we really liked chili on the persimmons, the sort of spicy and the sweet and the chili lime kind of flavoring. An important tip, I think, if you're going to do slices with hachias, is if you add apple slices to your dehydrator at the same time, it will noticeably reduce the astringency compared to just a regular drying process. You will lose some of the astringency in the drying process, but not often enough to really, make it a pleasurable eating experience. And I would say avoid anything that feels too puckery. And the apple slices really do help. And you want to dehydrate in single layers. Don't let anything touch each other. 12+ hours. It completely depends on the temperature you decide on and your thickness. Your slices are going to be done when they're pliable, but not actually sticky. You don't want any pockets of moisture unless you are going for that kind of paper thin slice. And the test that is often one to use is, can you take your persimmon, and I don't know if you can see me here in the little box, but you can bend it in your hands, and so it's still pliable, leathery, but it's not tacky to the touch. It won't stick to itself when you try to bend it. If it sticks, then it's not dry enough. And then you want to cool it. Don't package it right away with the heat in it, because that'll cause condensation. You want to use a labeled airtight container. The tip is to condition your fruit by putting in whatever that sealed container is, and just shake it around every day or two for about a week. And what will happen is that the moisture among the pieces will equalize with each other, and then you can sort of get a sense of the overall batch. And if it is too tacky then, or still too moist, if any pieces are, you want to take the whole batch, put it back in the dehydrator, and take it down for when it's dry enough. Ideally, you're going for 20% or less of the original moisture. And then you still store it in a cool, dark place. It's best consumed within a year, although I've eaten them many, many years past that. It's just a quality issue, not a safety issue. And you can use it in snacks or cooking or as a garnish. So enjoy. Any other questions on just basic drying process? Okay. Well, feel free to throw them in the chat. And I'm going to now turn it over to Deirdre Davis. And Deirdre, like all of us, is a master food preserver, but she's been working in food all of her life. She's been in the business. She's been a pastry chef. She's run a catering business. She's taught baking classes. She's got a homestead now in Pinole. So she's like, you know, all things about the fruit, and has been making hoshigaki for many years. And so we are going to go into the whole fruit aspect of drying. And I should note that hoshigaki are a very prized and beloved food, particularly in Japan. It's often a very special gift, and it's clearly a labor of love, as you will see. Deirdre?
Yes. There. Okay. Hi. So just to start, hoshigaki was described by Chef Suzanne Goyne as the Kobe beef of the fruit world. It is a very labor and time intensive delicacy, but to me, you know, the process and the transformation are just fascinating, and the results are, you know, make it all worth it. So these are hachias that are on a tree in Lafayette. That tree is on the right is in Lafayette, and it's one that I have gone to many times to pick the fruit. And yeah, it's enormous. And you know, for most people, like my friend, have no idea what to do with all these persimmons. So he's happy to have me come over and take some off his plate and bring him back some hoshigaki and some persimmon pudding. So next slide. So the first thing that you're going to do, first of all, you want to make sure that the persimmons are very, very firm. You want to get them underripe. So, you know, you're looking at, you know, getting them in October to November. They are you know, when they're on the tree, you will also want to make sure that when you are cutting them off the tree, that you're leaving enough stem to be able to create, or, you know, cut a T on the top. So in order to be able to hang them. So if you look at that picture on the left, you're cutting it so that you have this T so that you can hang the string on them. To prepare them to get ready to hang them, you know, first you want to just rinse them off. You can trim the calyx, that piece on top, and that is the most traditional way to do it, is to to trim it all. Or you can leave it on. I leave it on because I just think it's really pretty. It's like a little flower, and you know, I just think it's a nice part of the presentation. But traditionally, you do take it off. It does make it easier to peel. And if you look in the next slide, next slide. So I did a little video on peeling, just because it is an important part of it. And it's not always that easy to figure out how to really get all the peel off from the very top. So I like to use these Y peelers, which we'll show you. See one of those Y peelers, the Hoon, and see the little T on the top like that. And I left some of the calyx on there, and then I try to get underneath that calyx and get as close as I can to the stem to peel. And I'm doing this in these broad strokes. Number one, it creates a smoother surface over the whole thing, and number two, it's way less work when you have a lot less strokes. And if you're doing a whole bunch of them, you know, you want to figure out the fastest, most efficient way to do it. So this is a really, really good way to have a really nice clean surface. and just get the bottom, and there you go. And I do another one if you want to watch it again. And then I like to use little, the egg cartons to just hold things sometimes. It's, it's a way so that they don't have to be touching or sticking together or being on the side. But I will say that these are very firm, and that makes the whole process a whole lot easier. As we go on, you'll see what I'm talking about, and also, how quickly they can dry when they are really firm. So this was done on November 4th. And I think the next picture shows, what they look like when you first start. I think that's the next picture. And those are them there. Oh, actually, not yet. Okay. Actually, so there are two ways that you can dry these. And, the main thing is that they don't touch. So you just want to make sure there's enough air circulation around it. There's enough space between them. And you can use a drying rack. You could use a ladder. You could use a pot rack. I've seen a friend of mine had them all hanging in the kitchen around his pot rack. You could get creative. But so if you're going to do it this way, then you would be tying the fruit to the to the ends of the string, and then you would just take the string and hang it over the rack or whatever you have. And that's a pretty traditional way to do it. This is another way to do it, and I do it this way because I like to do a lot of them, and also, you can do a lot in a very contained space. So you just, you get some string. If you're not sure, I double the string up in some cotton string. I put an additional rod on there so I could close the curtains if I want. And then I just loop them. I use that T to kind of make a loop. And I just, and I have one here just to show you. So you have your string, and it's really simple. You're going to take your fruit and you're just going to loop it around. And that is it. And it's really easy. And so what's great about this too is that when they're ripe, because they don't all ripen at the same rate, you can very easily take it off and and let the others ripen up, and dry. I'm sorry, to let them dry. So the main things that are, you want to have them in a sunny, kind of warm place that has good air circulation. And when you do it, like at this time of year where it's still a little warm, they go pretty quickly. But they could take, 6 weeks, or they could take 2 weeks. It depends on how dry they are, how ripe they are, and how underripe they are, and how warm it is. Okay. So these are the ones I was just peeling. So day 1, you can see it's kind of moist. Day 2, it starts getting a little bit of a skin there. And day 3, you have more of a skin. So what you're going to be doing is, in order to make these, you're peeling the fruit, you're allowing a skin to form on the outside, and then you're basically massaging or kneading the fruit so that you're breaking up the pulp inside, and it's redistributing the sugars, and the whole fruit starts to soften up, and it's and you can see, well, you can go next slide. Yeah. So that was, 3 days. This is probably about a week. The ones on the left, and then the ones on the right those are pretty much ready to go on to the next step. So basically they're hanging there. I can show you. So this one this is just 2 days. This was from Tuesday, and you can see that it's a little drier. You can see a different color here. I don't know. Let me I don't actually see, oh, there we go. It's a little drier on top, gravity, liquids go down, and so it's a little drier on top, a little moisture on the bottom. I mean, the main thing is when you start doing this process that you want to make sure they're really, really dry, and that when you push against it, your fingers don't go through the skin. This is pretty dry, but it's kind of moist and cold on the bottom, and I wouldn't normally start at this time, but to show you what you're going to be doing is the first day, you're just going to kind of just be going around and just kind of pushing in, and you'll feel the pulp inside kind of give a little bit. And that's really all you need to do. I don't really do the bottom very much at first. I'm just kind of focusing on the top. And you do that to all of them, and wait a day, and then you're going to do it the next day, and you're going to continue to do that until it starts, transforming. So these are from the 4th. And so they have really transformed in 10 days. They're, they can vary in how much this one is a little drier. It could vary the size of it. It could vary with the amount of sun that it gets. But these have been, so basically you're going to be doing that massaging every day until all of the pulp inside has softened. And, what this really does is it redistributes the sugars. It softens the pulp, breaks down, redistributes the sugars. And also what it does, which is interesting, is that it gets out any air pockets that could be inside, which prevents mold and moisture from staying in the inside. So that's, anyway. So this one, yeah, this one's getting a little drier. And they have that different look that is, where's the slide, which, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Oh, so what you'll see here is that, they've dried a lot, and they have these different streaks on here, and that is the amount, oops, wait, not yet.
Sorry.
The amount of dryness varies on there. What's happening on the left is that when they were dry enough, I took them down and I put new ones up. So that's what's happening there. The middle one is basically, different ways that they're going to be drying. This is very evenly drying. The ones on the right, there's a lot of dry spots. But what happens is, as a food chemist I worked with years ago told me, nature seeks balance. So what's going to happen is when these are, going on in the process, it will all even out. And at this point, you can leave them up and allow the next part to happen, which what happens is the sugars in the fruit end up they end up being pulled out to the outside, and they create a white coating, a white powdery coating on the outside. So it is not mold. It is what it's supposed to look like. And this is what it looks like. The ones on the right are the very, very traditional with the calyx taken off. And those have been, those are completely done on, I think these were also done hanging. The ones on the right, the left are the ones I did, and I take them off as soon as they're dry enough, put them into a closed container, and put them in a cold, cool, dark place, and just let them sit for a few weeks, and the sugars are created. And you could see in the middle that they're so beautiful when you slice them. They're beautiful on a charcuterie display, or cheeses. They are wonderful with cheeses. It's like membrillo, I feel like, and they have this kind of complex date kind of flavor, kind of honeyed flavor, and some people describe it as like a gingerbready kind of flavor. And any questions?
Deirdre, Karen did have a question.
Mhm.
Was wondering how you would get the seeds out of the dried persimmons and how do you consume them?
Yeah, so when you slice the persimmons to eat them, you take the seeds out. That's that's the only way to do it. And the way that you would consume them is traditionally in Japan, they just have them as like a just like something to have with tea. It's just like a little snack to have with tea. I really love to use them with cheeses. It's like a dried fruit. It's something that's kind of a nice little sweet snack. But it is really nice with meats, salamis, things like that. But yeah, it's a dried fruit. So any way that you would eat a dried fruit, you could apply that. But it's also they're beautiful. They make wonderful gifts. Uh, you know, I have given them, put a few in a bag and put a little ribbon on top for the holidays, and they're just so pretty and they're just so interesting. Uh, that it's always kind of fun to give them for gifts.
And
Okay.
Deirdre,
Oh, go ahead.
Julie also mentioned that it's very time intensive and labor intensive, and it's considered a delicacy and expensive in Japanese markets.
Yes, it is. They are really expensive. Yeah. And I guess it's all relative, time and labor. I really enjoy the whole process. I think it's really fascinating. So I guess it's how you look at it.
So,
It's so interesting to have them. They're hanging, like Christmas ornaments in my dining room, and I get to look at them and you watch this transformation over the days, and I just think it's all seems worth it to me.
Deirdre, I'm going to thank you for a moment,
Mhm.
and then I want, in the interest of time, I want us to just get through a
Yes.
few
Yep.
additional announcements, and then we can stay on and try to answer a few questions. But bearing in mind that I know people have busy evenings, there are some upcoming online programs. If you just go to that first MFP major site. Actually, you'll find all sorts of things, recipes, resources, and so on. But there is an events tab, and you'll see upcoming events. We've got a monthly Ask a Master Food Preserver on the first Wednesday of the month. The Preserving Persimmons too, where we'll do some jams and vinegars and pickles. And Deirdre, maybe we can see the bloom
Yeah.
on the sugar bloom on your hoshigaki then. Will come up on December the 5th. And there's more programs that are listed in January, and just keep an eye on that site. More things will keep showing up for registration. And then, if I can get, here we go. There are some more opportunities. If you want to become trained to become a UC Master Food Preserver, again, it's that same UCANR site. And we'll again have all of these in the slide deck and in the handout for you. I think, Helen, you can probably put some of these in the chat as well. In addition to the events for Ask a Master Food Preserver on a monthly live event, you can also just post questions and get written answers at this site. You can follow us on social media by searching for us, UCMFP. And if you find us there, you can follow us on Facebook, and please like us. And we've just started a monthly newsletter, and you can sign up for that. The first edition has a persimmon pudding recipe in it. And then please, we do need your feedback to improve. And also, we're a grant funded program, and so it's important that we get your feedback. When the Zoom closes, you'll get a brief post event survey that will pop up, and we can close the video now. And we don't have a lot of time for questions, but I see some things in the chat, so maybe we can just take a few minutes before we close this up. Helen, do we have other major questions?
I think most of the questions have been answered. Nancy did ask if the December presentation will be recorded.
I think all of our presentations are recorded. But the postings, I believe the links for those again are on that home UCANR Master Food Preserver website. More questions? Um,
Does anybody have any more questions?
okay. Well, feel free to send any other questions to our Ask the Master Food Preservers. And as Travis has said in the chat here, you can email him in case you don't see the survey pop up. But thank you so much for your time, and enjoy your persimmons. I hope to see you in December.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.